This happen. So we'll call the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Pearland, Texas, Monday, August 6th at 7:08 p.m. We have a new member. Welcome Ron Wicker to the commission. And Thomas Duncan is not present. All other members are present and accounted for. That takes care of our call to order. Number 2 is our consent agenda. We have numerous items on the consent agenda tonight. Item A, consideration and possible action, approval of minutes and excused absence. Item B, consideration possible action, preliminary plat of Riverstone Ranch, Section 11. Item C, consideration and possible action, preliminary plat of Riverstone Ranch, Section 12. Item D, consideration and possible action, preliminary plat of Riverstone Ranch, Section 13. Item E, consideration and possible action, preliminary plat of Villages of Town Lake. That concludes our consent agenda items. Would any of the members of the commission wish to pull any item from the consent agenda? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve our consent agenda?
I'll move.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 6-0. Takes us to item number 3, new business. Item 3A, new business, consideration possible action replat of 4th partial replat of Shadow Creek Ranch commercial site number 18. This is a request of Joshua Kester of TriCheck Surveying Company LP, the applicant on behalf of Jahan Holdings LLC, owner, for approval of the plat of the 4th partial replat of Shadow Creek Ranch commercial site number 18A, 1 non-residential lot on 1.264 acres of land located on the east side of Kirby Drive, about 296 feet north of Shadow Creek Parkway. The general location, east side of Kirby Drive, about 296 feet north of Shadow Creek Ranch Parkway. Do I hear a motion for approval?
I'll move.
Have a motion and a second. A staff report.
Yes, sir. This item was on the agenda at the previous Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, in which the applicant wanted to address the issue of an easement that ran along the old alignment of Kirby Drive. However, at this time, the applicant has decided that they wish to keep the easements on the agenda and get the property platted and then deal with the easement later at a later date. But just to recap, this is the replat of the 4th partial replat of the Shadow Creek Ranch commercial site number 18, which would create 1 lot. And that concludes staff presentation.
Thank you. Remembering this was on the consent agenda of the last meeting and was pulled. So does the commission have any questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 6-0. Moving on to new business, item 3B, consideration and possible action replat of Sunset Lake, Section 3, replat of Reserve D, Block 2. This is a request of Marina Damian of Advanced Surveying Incorporated, the applicant on behalf of Harmony Dental PA, owner, for approval of the replat of Sunset Lake, Section 2, replat of Reserve D, Block 2, replatting 1 non-residential lot on 0.518 acres of land located at 3609 Sunset Meadow Drive. Do I hear a motion for approval?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. I have staff report.
This item is a replat of an existing lot, and basically all they are doing is getting rid of an existing easement that does not have any utility lines in it. Other than that, the exact measurements of this property in question will remain the same as the plat that is being created from. And that concludes my staff presentation.
Thank you. The commissioners have any questions on this item? Hearing none, all those in, sorry.
There we go, hit the button. I just wanted to say on this proposed plot, I believe that some of the nomenclature the city uses might not have been followed. I'm not going to suggest that the item be pulled from the agenda, but it's an easy fix. They have it titled an unrestricted reserve A, and it should be a lot and block number, not a reserve, if they want to be building on it. I mean, there's no restriction on the reserve, but I believe it would be a lot and block number if I'm understanding
Yes, sir.
planning's comments correctly.
Right.
So they can have that fixed prior to the plat being signed and prior to it being recorded. So it would be a motion to approve conditioned on them complying with the city's naming nomenclature.
Okay. The chair wishes to make a motion to revise the motion for approval to include a condition that this complies with the city's naming nomenclature.
We don't have to have a
Yes, we will.
second.
So I have a motion and a second to revise. All those in favor of the revision, signify by raising your right hand. Case that motion passes 6-0. Now we have a revised motion on the table to include the city's naming nomenclature as a condition. Is there any further discussion on this? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. This passes 6-0. Moving on to new business item 3C, consideration possible action, variance for minimum lot depth to allow platting of a new lot. This is a request of Samantha Jo Vickery, Windrose Lane Services applicant, on behalf of Vieira Kirby Partners LP owner for approval of a variance from section 16.4.1C of the Land Use and Urban Development Ordinance, ordinance number 509-H, to allow platting of a lot that will have a lot depth of 0 feet at the east corner of the lot located within the Shadow Creek Ranch planned unit development, commercial, on 0.5980 acres of land. The general location of this is north side of Broadway, about 200 feet east of Kirby Drive. Do I hear a motion for approval?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Staff report.
Thank you. This item is a request for a variance that would allow a 0 lot depth for a triangular shaped lot. The required lot area of the zoning district is 22,500 square feet. The proposed lot would be a little over 26,000 square feet. The lot width is required is 150 feet. The proposed lot width would be 296.63 feet. The exception would be the minimum lot depth is 125 feet, and at the east corner of the lot would have a 0 lot depth of 0 feet, since it will create a triangular shaped lot if the plat gets approved. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any of the commissioners have any questions on this item? Mr. Wicker?
Yes, I just, I see the exhibit, but by doing this, it would allow the lot to be buildable.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Because it would allow the applicant to get the property platted, which is the next item on the agenda.
Commissioner Wicker, the lot is buildable now. They could build on that lot if they were so inclined. But they want to be able to subdivide the lot. And to subdivide the lot into 2 lots, they have to split it in 2. And when they do that, even though it's already got a triangle shape, they are creating 1 lot that is a complete triangle shape. And that triangle shape is their irregular lot with a 0 depth lot line, which is why they need the variance first before they can come forward and plating. But it's up for y'all to determine whether or not the criteria for the variance are met. You get to decide if there's a hardship or if it creates nonconformities in the area and whether it serves the public. So I believe all the criteria for the variance are listed in the staff report. And if you think that those things are or are not met, that's what gauges your vote tonight on the variance first. And then the next item on the agenda, I believe, is going to be the plating, or later on the agenda,
Yes.
the plating of that triangle lot, if the variance is passed, would go forward.
I guess my question is the lot that doesn't show any building setback lines, side yard setback or rear yard setback, if that triangular tract is buildable according to the city's subdivision requirement?
Both the triangle lot and the lot that it's being broken off are buildable. I think it's important to let the Planning and Zoning Commission know that the city has had a request to put parking for the lot that it's being broken off of into the easement. One way to allow parking in the easement would be to require the parking be on this lot that is being broken off, if that makes sense. But either way, the lot that it's being broken off on is built out, I believe. I'd turn to staff just to verify.
It is.
Yeah. So the triangle lot that the applicant wants to break off is completely buildable if the variance request and the plat goes forward, but you do not need this variance to build on that lot as it stands now. They could just put another building on it without the variance request or without replatting and subdividing the land.
Mary, do you have any comments?
No.
No comments? I guess the only question I had was the triangle lot that's being created, not the one that's built on now. I'm trying to find it on Google. What's the frontage, the front distance dimension for the triangle lot that's being created?
See, it'd be that distance that was listed in the staff report.
That's the 300 feet?
It was about 200 feet. Uh, 296 feet.
What's the proposed lot? You go to the satellite. Okay, I see it. 300. It's still.
How do you get 0 feet?
It's at the part of the triangle that tapers at the very east end of the property. I think part of the issue with triangle lots is that because it does taper and you do get that 0 depth in the point of the triangle, is with the geometry of the lot, it kind of would limit future structures more towards the westerly portion of the lot and leave the easterly portion as a open space area.
And the request for parking is on the adjacent property? Or
This does not come with a request for parking.
what easement were you referring to?
So if you're looking at the diagram that's on the screen now, it says unrestricted reserve A and unrestricted reserve B. And that's what they hope to plat the lot. On the easement immediately behind that, unrestricted reserve A, there has been a request to allow parking inside that Houston Lighting and Power easement immediately to the north. And that would be for I believe it's a restaurant development that's there.
Has that been done anywhere else in the city?
It's actually been done near this area, but it was done, I couldn't say how it was done, but if you look at the city's criteria, specifically at the Shadow Creek Ranch PD, it would not be allowed, or it should not be allowed. So I wasn't involved in that decision, so I couldn't speak to the specifics of it.
So what I'm hearing is the property, the unrestricted reserve A that has a building on it now has a parking issue they need to resolve, but yet they want to split this lot into a separate lot to be built on.
They could build, there's already a building on the Reserve A portion of the lot, but they're asking to put parking on that easement because it might be that the development that wants to go inside the building, the structure that's already there needs more parking for its particular use. Like if it's a restaurant use, of course, it requires more. But if it were, I would turn to planning and say something less than a very low intense use that's retail takes less parking.
Like a clothing store.
Correct. What they're wanting to do is to have more restaurant parking.
Okay, I guess my point is they're splitting the lot to two to sell one portion of it, but yet the business that's on one already has parking issues that they're requesting to do something out of the norm, which would be parking in the easement, when there's property there that could be turned into parking now.
Yes, sir. Well, there's not an issue presently. There's not a parking problem that the city is aware of, and they're not under their parking ratio. But the city has been approached asking what, if anything, can be done to allow parking inside that easement.
So this could be one of those situations where the developments are approved for these two to build another building. When you look at the satellite image, it kind of gets smaller. When you think about putting another business right next to this one in that little triangle, it doesn't make sense to me because it was one lot to begin with. So someone looked at it and said, "This is one lot. Why would we split it in and try to cram something else in here or have a higher usage possibly on that piece and have an issue with parking like we do on a certain strip center on Broadway? Why would we want to add to that by allowing this?"
So it would be up to the commission's prerogative to look at the criteria for the variances, and they're in the staff report on page 3 of 8. And you would have to decide if it's going to create a parking issue and which criteria that does or does not meet. I think it's only incumbent on staff to say, there's a potential issue as you try to determine whether or not to grant the variance. But it would be to the commission to say, you know what, there are 8 criteria and you get to weigh those criteria. You get to say how many are or are not met when you make your decision for the variance request.
Well, if we approve if we approve the plat as presented, do they still not have to go to CenterPoint or the power company, whoever takes New Mexico? I don't know who owns the easement. Do they not have to get permission from that?
Yes, sir. And they can get permission because I believe when they came to the city, they said they had a letter from the owner of the easement saying that we don't mind them putting parking on it as long as there aren't any structures and as long as they remove it or we are not responsible for maintaining it and we can remove it at our whim if we need to maintain our power easement. So I believe the permission for them to get on that easement isn't going to be an obstacle in any way whatsoever. It would be complying with the open space requirements of the PD, and then the question would be whether the variance request, I'm sorry, it's not a variance request at this point, whether the potential for a parking issue, if the variance request would create a potential for the variance parking, because we know that they've asked to park in that easement now, when that could be resolved by not granting the variance request and then just requiring them to do the parking on the remainder lot.
I just have one other question. Is the applicant here? So let the record show the applicant's not here. Ms. Kay, do you have any comments? Daryl?
Well, this is kind of concerning to me if the applicant doesn't even bother to show up and explain what you got going on. That, I mean, how can we get interested in it if they're not going to be interested enough to show up and explain things that we have questions on? So until we can get some type of explanation, I'm not going to vote for it.
Any further comments? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed? Motion is denied, 0-6. Moving on to new business, item 3D, consideration and possible action approval of an irregular shaped lot to allow for the development of property. This is a request of Marina Damian, Advanced Surveying and applicant on behalf of Triple S Pearland Property LLC for approval of a variance permitted in section 2.6.1B1 of the Unified Development Code Ordinance number 2000T to allow for approval of a creation of an irregularly shaped lot within the planned unit development zoning district. General location is the northeast corner of Broadway and Broadway Bend Drive. I hear a motion for approval.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second from Mr. Eisenberg. Staff report.
On this item, the request is located at the northeast corner of Broadway and Broadway Bend. And the request is to have the irregular lot created to allow the expansion of one of the lots that in a current plat to allow the expansion of the parking area for that property. However, as a result of expanding that lot, the lot to the north will have a narrowed shape in part of the property. And looking at the part of the analysis of looking at the lot to the north that will be created, I did look at side setbacks to see if there was any issues that would be created. However, there were no side yard setbacks to be concerned about. However, the building, any structure built on this property would have to be a fairly narrow structure. This is a survey that shows the property in question. That concludes my, I did confirm with the applicant that it was primarily so they could expand the property. I mean, yes, the property on the lot to the south. That concludes my staff presentation.
Thank you. I'll start with Daryl. Do you have any questions? Any? Troy? Mary?
No.
Mr. Wicker? The only comment I have is it does create, there's another lot to the northeast that has a similar key-shaped component that probably will never be used. So I don't really have an issue with this one at all. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed? Motion passes 5-1. Moving on to item E in the new business. Consideration and possible action, partial replat of Lot 2A, Block 1, Kirby Commons. This is a request of Marina Damian of Advanced Surveying Incorporated, the applicant on behalf of Triple S Property LLC and Cy Carmel Springs LLC owners for approval of a partial replat of Lot 2A, Block 1 of Kirby Commons, 2 non-residential lots on 3.6529 acres of land located at the northeast corner of Broadway and Broadway Bend. Do I hear a motion for approval? Have a motion and a second. Staff report.
This property is, again, is the property located at the northeast corner of Broadway and Broadway Bend. This property is basically adjusting the boundaries between two existing lots, of which the variance to allow the platting or the replatting of this property to go forward. That concludes staff presentation.
Commission, have any questions? Any further questions? Mary? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 6-0. Move on, new business, item 3F, consideration possible action variance from the 3-to-1 front to depth ratio for a lot. This is a request of Matthew Sigmund on the applicant on behalf of Sam and Emily Adamo, owner, for approval of a variance permitted in section 2.4.2.4C1B and section 2.6.11B1 of the Unified Development Code and Ordinance number 2000T to increase the maximum lot depth to width ratio from 3-to-1 to 6.61-to-1 to allow for replatting of 3 existing lots into 2 lots within the SR12 Suburban Residential 12 zoning district. The general location is 1820 Adama Lane. Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. Staff report.
This property, the request for the variance from the 3-to-1 front to depth ratio located at 1820 Adamo Lane. This request is essentially a request to create 2 rather deep residential lots. Currently, there is a residential plat that includes 1 fairly large flag lot and 2 smaller residential lots. This variance would allow the property to be replatted as 2 lots. And in looking at this variance, we did, there is a house that's located on the property that would be on the lot created to the south. And we had determined that the existing house, the distance between the existing house and the proposed property line would exceed the minimum required distance for the side yard setback in order to avoid creating the need for a zoning board of adjustment for a side yard setback variance. That concludes my staff presentation.
Can you repeat that last part again about the side yard?
Yes, sir. There's a house on the property, and there staff had a concern that the property line, even though it would go down the middle of the property, we were concerned that it would be too close to the house, and that it would. We didn't want to create a situation where that house would become in violation of the side yard setback from a potential property line.
And what's the current distance from the side yard to the proposed property line?
It's a little over 11 feet, and the side yard setback is 10 feet. It's cutting it close. Yes, sir.
Did it say a single senior? Something on there said, go back.
It's a single family house.
It said single senior somewhere,
Might have been a mistake.
maybe. I saw single senior on there somewhere. I was wondering what that meant. was on, not on this part. Go back.
So my comment is, I don't see an issue. They're both very large lots. They're both well over the SR12 threshold. The width, the depth, what's on the one lot now doesn't really matter to me. I'm for this one. Do we have any other further comments from the commission? Mr. Wickers, Mary, anything? Nope. Hear none. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 6-0. I guess moving on to item new business 3G, consider possible action replat of Adamo Estates. This is a request again of Matthew Sigmund, the applicant, on behalf of Sam and Emily Adamo, owner, for approval of the replat Adamo Estates, creating 2 residential lots, 5.06 acres of land located on 1820 Adamo Lane. Do I hear a motion for approval? I have a motion and a second. We have staff report. This is, I guess, the replat as the result of a variance approval from our last.
Yes, sir. It's a replat that'll create 2 single-family lots that will replace 3 existing single-family lots. That concludes my staff presentation.
Thank you. Do the commissioners have any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 6-0. Moving on to new business item 3H, consideration possible action, zone change application number zone 18-00011. Do I hear a motion for approval? I have a motion and a second. This is an item from our joint public hearing. Held right before this meeting. A motion and a second. Does staff have anything additional to add to this item?
No, sir.
I'll start with Daryl. Do you want to input anything to this item? Questions?
Yeah, I think it was pretty well stated in the last meeting. I don't think it got very little traction whatsoever, so.
Any?
I don't have anything else to say. We covered it, I think.
Rickers? Any questions?
I guess I don't really have any questions. I went out and looked at the track, and I don't know what has been covered previously, but it looks like it would, it would be okay.
This is the item from 1128, the 2 lots in the residential area that we heard just previously. Item H on the new business. Sometimes these get confused. They're all the consent agenda and the other agendas are all lettered, so you got to make sure you're on the right page.
When people are referring to it being heard previously, they mean at the joint public hearing where the public came in earlier tonight and spoke
Okay.
against the item.
Yeah, well, I was against that.
So if we don't have no further comments, hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed? Motion is denied, 0-6. Did we make it through? Okay, moving on to item 4. Commission discussion items. Item number 1, tree mitigation.
Okay. So we wanted to start a new discussion item section for Unified Development Code edits that we wanted to get y'all's opinion on before we brought it to a joint public hearing and actually had our full joint discussion between y'all and council. One of those items that we've been working on, which we discussed last November, and then it finally got approved in April, was tree mitigation credits. As you are probably likely aware, there was the state law change that we had to come into compliance with. Now that that is done, we're working towards changing up some of the language within our landscape credit requirements. So what you have on the screen is a new credit giving the developer up to 25% credit towards tree mitigation for larger plantings. So currently the Unified Development Code has a minimum tree planting requirement of 2 inches. But if the developer were to come in and to plant 6 inches, they would receive that full 4-inch credit. Trees, the cost is lower per caliper inch for trees larger than 2 inches. The community gets a better tree out of it. And then development has more of an enhanced flavor to it. And it has a higher chance of maintaining its growth and actually thriving within the area. On preservations, the developer can receive up to 25% credit on tree mitigation for choosing to preserve protected trees which exist on a site. This minimizes developer impact on urban forests. Mature trees have the opportunity to increase property value and create a positive image while attracting new businesses to the city, and improves environmental benefit as it reduces storm water runoff, improves air quality, reduces ambient temperature, produces oxygen, reduces carbon dioxide, and provides wildlife habitat. So in summary, what we're looking at doing for our tree credit section is to provide the development community with 2 additional tree credit types and to reduce any applicable tree mitigation by up to 50%. The city is also proposing to add pine tree as an approved tree for preservation credits. And since we do butt up against some of the piney woods, the very lower tip of it, that's one of the things that our urban forester has suggested to add into the preservation calculations.
So that would be an approved tree to plant?
An approved tree to receive credit for if it exists within a large enough diameter that they would receive
Credit.
mitigation credits for.
But it still won't be an acceptable tree to plant, correct?
Correct. The recommendation is for preservation, not for planting. So if you keep a pine tree that is of substantial, what do we call it, with a substantial circumference, you can get your preservation credit there. However, it's not going to be an approved tree to give mitigation credits.
At one time, I asked some questions, and the urban forester at the time had gotten back with me, and we had talked about him coming and giving kind of a presentation of what he does for the city and how this process goes in development, because it's something that we don't generally know about. I think the public would be interested in how that is done. I still think that's a good idea. I understand our urban forester has changed, so I think the commission would benefit from that. Maybe a small presentation to the commission to explain how that process works and how they take part in it. We certainly have looked at a large tract of land close to here that a lot of people's eyes were on that have a lot of trees on it, and the public wanted to know how that was going to be dealt with when the bulldozers start taking trees out. So anyway, it looks to be a good trade-off and allow the developer some flexibility to come back and put in larger trees and get a little bit more credit.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask a couple of questions. On tree mitigation, and I'm fairly familiar with the tree ordinances in cities. There are certain trees in most cities that you don't want to give credit for. And there's certain trees that you want to give credit for. Do we have that in our criteria?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we do.
I think having the person come in and explain all that would be very helpful.
When this comes forward for full joint public hearing, our urban forester will be here.
Any comments?
Explain to me on the very first part of it about getting credit as far as the city requires a 2-inch minimum tree. Okay, now is that if somebody takes out some trees and they come back and put in a 6-inch tree, they're going to get credit for a 4-inch tree?
Right. So the way that I understand it is that you have a site and you remove X amount of trees, and then you have to give credit for a certain percentage of those trees. A portion, 25% of that total credit, can come from oversizing of trees that you would have to put in anyway.
Okay. I mean, I understand. In other words, you got to come back in and put in at least a 2-inch tree.
Any tree that
Over
gets
so many
planted
trees
has to
that
be
you
a
take out.
2-inch, but if you put it back
But
higher
if you put
than,
a bigger one, you get credit for a 4-inch, so you don't have to plant as many trees.
correct.
Okay.
I don't know the numbers, but say there's 1,000 inches of tree. That equates to X dollars to the developer if he wants to take those out. He has to put in a certain number of trees, and they have to be 2-inch minimum. He can get some more money back, credit, if he puts in 6-inch trees instead of 2-inch trees. So it's kind of a trade-off. They get to save some money. The city still gets a bigger tree. Win-win. Any other questions?
It's basically the larger the tree, the less trees you have to put, like you said, correct?
And the higher quality we receive, or perceived quality at least,
So how will this come back to us in a
and a text amendment.
text amendment?
So I think the next time that you'll see this would be at a joint public hearing. But the goal was to see if y'all were interested in this and make sure that you were aware of it, so that at the joint public hearing, it's not the first time that you hear about it.
I like that. Okay, moving on to item 2, massage parlors.
So I know that there's been discussion previously about massage parlors. I wanted to, I know one of the commissioners had requested that this be put back up for discussion. Again, we're willing to listen and take y'all's direction for our next round of text amendments, as particularly what y'all would like to see, whether that be a definition, which zoning categories you would like this to be approved by right, approved through conditional use for, since we don't have a definition currently within the Unified Development Code. And as far as I understand, that is one of the things that y'all would like to see. So I want to intake some recommendations, so that way I can draft a better text amendment for you.
Okay. You want to start?
Thank you for letting us discuss this. I think that massage parlors should be added, an amendment to the UDC. They need to be certified and manned by certified massage technicians, if you will, but there needs to be some certification involved. And taking, and not just, and this needs to be retroactive if possible, and yes, by CUP. Only opened under CUP from now on. But if they can be, can it be retroactive? I don't know if that's possible. No? Okay. But the foot spas and things like that, they need to be certified. Thank you. That's my main thing.
You don't mind if I jump in? This is one of the items I asked to be put on the agenda, along with multiple others. One of my concerns is that we follow the UDC, and this commission and other bodies and citizens are allowed what the UDC directs us to be able to do, and that's to ask for a text amendment to the UDC, no matter what it applies to. There's been a lot of discussion from developers about certain issues of the UDC that they don't like. I would like to see this commission and the council be receptive to that and put those items through the process so that we can put them through the process and act on them or not act on them. And then it's on public record. We've done this. We've looked at it. This was the outcome. This is one of the items when I started looking at it. Of course, numerous groups in town have reached out to various people on commissions and council about massage parlors in town. Kind of like gas stations. When we noticed a whole bunch of gas stations, we, being the city, saw this influx or there's an issue with gas stations, then lo and behold, we come up with the CUP requirements for a gas station. Of course, everybody knew what a gas station was when we looked at that. It's pretty self-explanatory what it is. One of the things that bothered me about massage parlors is that business isn't defined in our land use category, our land use matrix, where any of the massage businesses are kind of lumped in with other land uses. Beauty salon, I'm guessing is where most of them are land. So I see a need, being that we have over 29 of these businesses, I believe, in Pearland. From the state records, I believe we're at 29. That's businesses only, not those are licensed massage businesses that hold licenses. And the fact that those businesses in other cities have had problems with various legalities. I think we owe it to the city to, at least at a minimum from this commission. Of course, all we can do is recommend changes. Me personally, I would like to see this use defined for all the massage uses to be lumped into the land use matrix under their own category. To define any massaging of the body, I guess, and this is where we got to talk about this in our joint forum, is defining medical versus non-medical massage, so that we're not trying to regulate where we don't need to be. Medical massage is different, of course, but the massage businesses, I believe, need to be defined. With that definition, we put the land use matrix in there and decide as a city if those are allowed by right in what zoning districts, or if they're required to have a CUP. I have an opinion on that, but I want to see this go through the process. I believe they need to be a CUP in any zone they're allowed in, and I believe there needs to be some form of regulation in the CUP to ensure the business is legit. I think it's proven across the country that certain minimum standards applied to these businesses keep them on the up and up. Things like the transparency of the front windows, some of the items that other cities recommend we already cover with code. But that we look at that in the joint public hearing and see if that has a majority vote or not. If it doesn't, then so be it. But I think we owe it to the citizens to look at it. As far as, I also believe that there needs to be an ordinance that does the same thing, retroactive to the businesses that are already established. That one will probably get a lot of pushback, but that would be a suggestion. As far as what this commission handles, our recommendation, we deal with the UDC, so that would be the defining of and looking at where those are allowed and any conditions with that basic CUP if a CUP is applied to those. I think there's 5 or 6 conditions we could put in the land use matrix and apply them to those, and legit businesses wouldn't have one issue with them. One of them displaying licenses for the establishment, displaying licenses for the people that are on duty. I don't think those are out of the question things to ask for.
I think the transparency of the windows is good, and the doors should not be locked during their hours of business, and their hours of business shouldn't be past a certain time. If it's a medical massage or any massage, that I don't think being open till midnight is the norm. I think things like that should be built into the guidelines, if you will. There's got to be some sort of health code that we could follow on that.
Could we look at some of the other cities that have strong ordinances along these lines?
Yes. I mean, that would be part of our research.
Daryl?
Yeah. I agree with pretty much everything that's been said up here. The time frame, I think the legitimate businesses close around 8 o'clock, something like that. So as far as licensing and stuff, from what I've been told, talking to a few of the organizations and such, that, you don't have to have a license to massage up to the knee and up to the shoulder. I think if you go past, it may be the elbow, up to the elbow. If you go past the elbow, you got to have a license. If you go past the knee, you got to have a license. I don't know how we do anything about that. I am for putting a CUP because I think some of these, we've already targeted some of them, and it's kind of like roaches. When the lights flipped on, they seem to scatter. I think the work that STOP does and some of the other organizations and such that have gotten involved ever since we've kind of brought this to light are good organizations for all of us to get involved with. We can sit here and make all these regulations that we want, but the bottom line, if somebody is going to be crooked and they're going to do something, they're going to do it. They're going to find out a way to do it, especially if we aren't shining a light on it. Once we shine a light on it, then it's like I said, they're like roaches. They seem to scatter and go other places. That's a lot of the problem that we end up having here in Pearland. And I talked to some police officers out of Houston, and they said, we'll make raids. And he goes, and when we make raids, he said, that pushes them down to establishments that they already have set up in different areas that are south of town. He said, he goes, once, like Pearland makes a raid and goes through there and busts some of them, it'll scatter them and make them go to other places that they already have established. But I do think that there are some things that we can do. Now, I understand that we talk about making the windows transparent and stuff. Yeah, but they can sit there and go 10 feet behind that window and put up a barrier, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's certain things that we can't do. I don't know what the police can do on this, other than if we bring a complaint to them with some of these organizations, then they can go out and try to do a sting operation on them as well. It doesn't get in the news if they do it. I don't know. that's probably something that we probably would like to hear from our police department on how they handle these situations. But, it's really all I got to say about it.
Troy?
I believe that whether you're doing a foot massage or a body massage, all of them should be regulated and certified. Because one thing will lead to another. You're just doing a up to the knee.
Mary?
They definitely need to be regulated and licensed, and then we need to have a report on what the licenses really allow, so that if it's, other than that, it might be incorporated into an ordinance that says whether they can or cannot operate in the area. I think it's going to have to be more than just the UDC. I think it's going to have an ordinance of some sort that council passes also. But it's definitely something that needs to be done.
Mr. Wicker?
Well, I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think there's probably some good regulations around. I think that we definitely need some things. I thought that there were some certificates or some qualifications on some of them. I know there's a school in Clear Lake that teaches massage therapy, and maybe if there's some state laws or state criteria for certification that that could be incorporated. But I think the best bet would be to find out what some of the cities around the area and the state are doing to. This has been an issue for years, and it can get bad, and you just need to address it.
I had a couple questions for staff. I guess in looking at a lot of these businesses down 518 and other places, some seem to have, I guess, similar owners, because the window treatments and our UDC regulates how much advertising can go on windows, correct? Is it like 25%?
25% is the minimum transparency requirement for businesses that are face onto the corridor overlay district. So Broadway, the main streets.
So how much advertising does that equate to? Like,
it depends on the frontage, because you have to take the calculation based off of the storefront.
but you
So
said
if they have
25% transparency, meaning
if they have 100 square foot of windows and they're work it backwards. If they have 100 square foot frontage, then 25 square feet is the minimum windows that they would have to have. If they have 50 square foot of windows, so 50% of their building frontage is windows, then they could have 25 square foot of additional advertising space, as long as everything else was met. But running along with this transparency idea, then they could have 25 square foot of window and 25 square foot of advertisement on the window.
so 100 square foot of building
Mhm.
facing the corridor.
Right, just to keep the numbers.
They have to have, what is this doing? I guess it thought I was calling for Siri. 25% need to be windows. So if they have 50% windows,
Then they can cover up.
half of them can be covered up.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. The other item, and again, this applies to other businesses as well, is the lighting, the string lighting, LED lighting that so many people are opposed to, and we've added as a condition on many other conditional use permits. I believe this commission is, if we're going to look at businesses and CUPs, and every time we're going to add no string lighting, no lighting on the window surrounding the windows, I believe we should look at that citywide. And possibly another issue having a lighting ordinance. I know that doesn't have a lot of traction, but it may. It just seems that some of these places, these lights are very, very annoying to drivers even. And still on Pearland Parkway, we have lighting issues. Some of the businesses to attract attention to them that we're talking about here have those lights that are meant to attract people to them. Again, I'm opposed to those type of lighting that just seem. I just don't like them. And I think there's plenty of people that agree because we're tagging it onto CUPs for liquor stores and other things. So that might be a little side project to these items you've outlined here to look at the lighting again, and maybe we can get something to make it better, not necessarily solve the issue, but solve some of the problems that people are complaining about with the bright LED string lights added to the exterior of the building. And I do appreciate staff bringing this up and going through the process to present a change to go through the steps. Do we have any other further comments on this item? Okay, hearing none, moving on to number 3, planning triggers.
So we saw this at the July joint public hearing, also at the July 16th P&Z meeting, where we briefly discussed it before tabling it. I wanted to make sure that it was a part of the discussion tonight, just to revisit it and bring up whether y'all had questions. I know we're working towards the September 10th, I believe, date that y'all had chosen to bring this up officially again. But if y'all had specific questions or guidance that you would like to have things researched for you, particularly for that September 10th date, this is at least an opportunity to bring that up formally.
Daryl, you want to start, or I can? So I went through this today, a few hours, and looked at some of the triggers that I agree with and don't agree with. One builder locally reached out to me and had some questions about it. The comments that come from this builder were, it's extremely hard to take an old property in Pearland that has sit vacant even for 6-7 months and make it usable. He's got a market for people wanting to buy property, get a tenant in it, make the property better. But he knows going into it that the trigger is going to be there for total UDC compliance. And I printed out a few buildings that I think fit that mold, and what seems to be the case on all of them is they're metal buildings. They're older metal buildings. They have gravel driveways, or they don't have a driveway at all. They have a dumpster sitting out front. Some of them are occupied, some of them aren't. Some of them have been sitting a while. So my issue with those is the property is going to sit there and continue to, nobody's going to spend money on it. It's going to be a code enforcement nightmare until the building gets so bad it's going to get condemned, and then the city has to spend more money acting on that. All because the UDC is so strict on somebody going into that business, even though they have to build it up to building code, to electrical code and what have you, fire code, to meet that minimum. We add on top of that, the building needs to have a brick facade or a stone facade, and the building might not even be able to hold that facade. So it makes it almost impossible to develop that piece of that building for use. I see the other side of it. You don't want, some people say they don't want the metal building at all because it looks bad. We want something new looking. Well, they don't own the property. We sat here a few years ago, one property somebody bought, they bought it by mistake, kind of like the lady that bought the property on 1128 tonight. The realtor sold it to them. They didn't know what they could do on it or not. Lo and behold, they're getting denied for that. They can't use the property. we had in the one I'm talking about, the building couldn't be used. So the person now owns a building they paid for. Maybe it's their job to know what they buy. I mean, but the city ought to still come back. We ought to have a means for these properties to not fully have to do the full UDC compliance because it's going to cost too much. It's not cost effective, so they're going to go somewhere else, and that building's just going to sit. I like I disagree with the parking lot one. I guess it's over 3,000 square feet. That if somebody already has a business, they want to, and they have the land for the parking, I think they ought to be able to expand that without having to do any further UDC improvements to the building. Dumpster screening, yes, I can agree with that. That just needs to be a default one. And I don't think anybody developing a property would have a problem screening the dumpster if they're going to use it. That's a no-brainer. When we get into the trigger, the square footage percent, or the 10%, 20%, 10 to 25%, depending on what city you looked at, that's a hard call to make without council's input. I would say from this commission that we go somewhere between 10 and 25%, maybe in the 15 to 20% range, and recommend that as a change. Something has to give in our UDC so that it's easier to take old properties and make them usable again. We have to be able to do that in the city. We have to give the people that own that property a means to do that. I don't think it's fair to somebody that owns a building telling them it has to be brand new, meet all the UDC codes to be used and to get a permit and an occupancy in the city. The change of use, I don't necessarily agree with that one because the building's being used for one purpose. You change the use slightly, we've seen this, and it totally triggers the UDC. That one I think we owe a little bit more to look at because we take a convenience store and we turn it into a tile store. And they don't have the building needs and requirements aren't the same. But as far as we're concerned, it's a business. It's one business equals the other. So that's where I struggle with that one. Because if it's a warehouse type building and you're changing the use of the building, it's still a building. But a convenience store, slightly different building, slightly different, built to a different use. Is meeting UDC actually going to solve that problem or not? Probably it may trigger the change. They may do it, but you're still with a building that's not it's not the same use as what it was built for. Anyway, that's my starting comments. Mary? I'll jump in the middle.
All right, I agree with Daniel on this thing with the old buildings. To me, it's worse to let them just sit there and deteriorate than it is to let somebody use it and make it look at least like it's not falling down around them. There's got to be some kind of a way to let people use the property without triggering, making it look like it's brand new. Metal buildings were built, a lot of them are built better than some of the new buildings are built right now. I hate to disillusion people, but just because a building is new doesn't mean it's in better shape and stronger. Facade is great on a new building, but you take these old buildings, they're not built for it. And the owners of those properties are sort of like stuck with them, particularly if it's older people who have run a business there for years and would like to sell the property so they would have some money to retire on, but they can't sell it to anybody because it'll trigger all this repair. there's got to be some way to put this in the ordinance so that those kinds of things can be taken care of. The percentage also is a factor. 10% sounds like a lot on a smaller building, but if you take one of these in an M1 district, it does, some of these big buildings, 10% of that one would be a lot of expansion for someone to do, and probably wouldn't be too much of a problem for those owners. You take 10% of a small building, and the cost of redoing a lot of this becomes another problem. There should be either, maybe we can do a sliding scale, which is sort of in here, but I think maybe a little bit more on the smaller buildings particularly. There's still some work to be done on this. It's a good start.
Mr. Wickers?
I really don't have a lot of comments on this. I haven't had a chance to, I mean, this is my first meeting, and I've been on Planning and Zoning Commission before in Lake City, and I thought they were busy, but never had an agenda like we have here. And quite honestly, it's going to take me a little while to get up to speed on a lot of this stuff that's going on. I'll just have to do some more studying on it.
Daryl? Any? One of the things on the process, I know it would burden the system to bring these to council or bring these through the joint public hearing one at a time, but it seems like we end up spending more time dealing with 7 items that are all lumped into one. If somebody doesn't like item number 2 and 4, then we end up doing, the process takes longer to deal with it as 7 items as a whole. If we had 7 items, 5 of them no one had an issue with, we could easily pass those changes on, doing those 5 individually, and then the other 2, if we had issues or needed to revise them, the way they're presented in the announcements in the agenda may make it go faster if we split them out by change. Even though it would increase the documentation, it would probably make them go faster through the process to have them line item one by one. Because I think in the council meeting, some of these items of the 5 or 6 that we looked at, some people didn't have a comment. But then there were 2 that we looked at and they said, well, no, this is a bigger deal. We need to discuss it more. Well, we could have passed 5 of those that night and moved those down the line, and then dealt with the 2 that needed more work. If we're going to do this on a regular basis, which I really like hearing that, we can put these in the system and get them passed as they make sense. Because some of these are no-brainers. Our commission comes up all the time. We find things in the UDC that we're like, that doesn't even make sense. We need to change that. I mean, it may have been a mistake, and there needs to be a means for us to roll through getting those changed. And I like making things simple. Sometimes we need to get out the green pen and delete some of this nonsense out of the UDC and make it go away for good. I'll leave it at that. Anything else? Where am I at? Am I at adjourn? No. I'll add one thing like that. I sent Jay some pictures from Roanoke, Texas, of their Main Street. I don't know if y'all got those or not. We talk about facade requirements. Roanoke did something interesting in their Main Street project. They had metal buildings on their Main Street, and their code required them to put a facade on the building, but only on the front. They had a front requirement and certain feet down the sides. which give the illusion of Main Street. Because you could walk the city, you have a storefront, but I sent her the wide picture, and hopefully we can share that as an idea of how we can deal with facade. If a developer was given the opportunity to put a brick facade on the entire building, or to refacade the front 25% or 20% of the building, that's a huge savings, and they may be willing to do that versus to spend it to do the entire building, and that might not make sense or be too cost prohibitive to do it. And I think in their example, if you look at that Main Street project they have, it works. They have a mixture of old homes, new businesses, old businesses, some of them very old, and some metal buildings in that they've all kind of integrated through new streets, new sidewalks, new crosswalks, community landscaping. And then every development that goes in there has to meet their requirements for that district. And one by one, they've made a very marketable city for that strip that brings in tourists to that little town, which doesn't really have any other tourist attraction other than the racetrack and that. But they've made their own attraction, and that's one of the things I thought was cool when I saw the building. Was you got a couple metal buildings with a brick. They built a new storefront right on the front. And if you're just walking down the street, you might not even notice that that's an old 70s model metal building. Anyway, I'll be quiet now. Moving on to item 4, the Commissioner's Activity Report. Anyone? Okay, hearing none. Item 5, next P&Z regular meeting is September 10th. Wow, it is a long time. If you know you're not going to be here, let staff know as soon as possible so we can make sure we have a quorum. Staff have anything else? I will adjourn at 8:25.